Okay, well, it's 10:15. I think we can start our next session. My name is Andrew Adesi. I'm the supervisory forester for the Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservation, and also a member of the Blue Mountain chapter of OSAF. And I'm really happy to serve as a moderator for this next session. During the session, we will delve into the topic of partnerships on landscape restoration and hear a lot about collaborative efforts around our region. We'll first hear an overview of collaboratives and partnerships from our first speaker, and then we'll hear a number of great presentations about some of the work being done here in this Northeast Oregon region and across the Blue Mountains. I'm really excited about this session. Our first speaker is Emily Jane Davis. She is a social scientist and extension specialist in the Department of Forest Ecosystems and Society and the Forestry and Natural Resource Extension Program at Oregon State University. She's also an associate director of the Ecosystem Workforce Program in partnership with the University of Oregon. She will be giving a talk titled Collaborative and Partnership Approaches to Forest Restorations. So Emily, you can share your screen, as I think you already have, and take it away.
Great, thanks Andrew, and good morning everyone. I'm gonna just say hi here and then turn off my video to conserve bandwidth. So thank you for having me. My purpose today is to talk about how people and organizations work together and take collective action to advance forest restoration on the ground in their local areas. So what I'll be doing is describing a couple common forms of that and offering a really broad overview. It's definitely a little bit more academic, a little higher level, but if you can sit through it, I promise that the speakers who come after me are going to have the more fun job of helping bring the specific examples to life through their own experiences in actual places. So that will be good. And even though it might seem dry and not everyone is a process person, what I'm talking about is important because I think we actually really need to get more clarity on what we mean when we use words like partnerships or collaboration. They can mean really different things. There are a lot of different flavors out there. And a better understanding of those different partnership and collaborative types can actually help you as a participant, as well as an agency or funder that might be supporting them, to really set realistic expectations for what they're doing and working together and what you can really hope to get out of them. So I'll start by talking about what I mean by collective action. It's when multiple actors are affected by an issue and then they become involved in working together to try to address it. And we have a lot of expectation for collective action. We really hope it's going to help us overcome problems. Social science posits collective action, collaborative governance as a potential solution to previous policy and management approaches that might not have been working well, that might not have been inclusive enough or flexible enough, or to adversarial environmental politics. We even hope it will store rationality. So these are pretty big expectations. And then accordingly, social scientists have made collective action a really complex topic to study. It can take a lot of different forms. So if you just use Google Scholar and you look for the word collaboration, you can get over 4.5 million hits. Natural resource collaboration gets you well over 3 million. And we have all these different ways of describing and classifying many different forms of working together in collective action. So we make it complicated, but that's because collective action efforts really do vary. How they're organized, what they do, and what we can expect from them really isn't always the same. Some of the variables that affect how a collective action effort might look are what are its goals, what's its purpose, what kind of landscapes are included in it, what's the problem domain or the issues that you're trying to make better, who is involved, what are they actually trying to do together, and importantly, what kinds of decisions might they be making together and who has different kinds of power to make those decisions, as well as the degree to which the focus is on coordinating, cooperating, or all the way seeking full consensus. These are some of the different ways we can think about these partnerships, collaboratives. In the case of forest restoration, for collective action, we have many affected actors from landowners to government agencies, right, who are managing different resources and land bases. We have other actors like nonprofits and scientists who are involved as well. And oftentimes we experience we get motivated to work together in forest restoration because of something that policy scholars call a focusing event. So we go through a wildfire, we see a disease or insect outbreak in our area, something that's extensive or intensive enough that it affects enough of our values, and then it makes us say, we have to work together. This is getting our attention. Something needs to change. And this so really galvanizes people. Oftentimes, it's also just that recognition of the interrelatedness of healthy forests and healthy communities, especially in rural areas, and the economic and social impacts of needing to restore forests, and what can be accomplished through restoring forests can be a really important motivator as well. The impetus often also is social conflict, so disagreement about why we might be experiencing a forest management issue, what the science says we could do to address it, and what management approaches we might take and the implications of those. So that social conflict is unto itself a really important reason to work together to overcome differences and look for common ground solutions. What I'll do now is I'll talk about a few types of collective action that we see in forest restoration in Oregon. And first, I'll be talking about some examples of what cross-boundary partnerships look like. So when I say cross-boundary partnerships, by this I mean the planning and implementation of forest management activities that are coordinated across land ownership boundaries, so more than one landowner, and that it take place through the engagement of multiple partners and landowners. And the way this manifests can look different. So one model for this cross-boundary work is what we might call federal lands anchored. So a project that typically starts with identification of some landscape of federally owned land, which often happens during the environmental analysis process. And then that looks at adjacent landowners and partners that might work with them for opportunities to scale this up and out and make sure that forest health or wildfire risk issues that are crossing those boundaries can be addressed. But this is often really motivated by, okay, where are we going to be getting a large landscape done on federal ground, and how are we going to work across that? Another model that we see in Eastern Oregon as well is private landowner-driven groups or projects that span multiple non-industrial private forest landowner parcels, often in an adjacent area like a local neighborhood, valley, or drainage. And these are really often driven by landowner leaders or by leaders who work with landowners, like consulting foresters or agencies that provide landowner assistance. The values of interest really vary, but as we know, they often center around landowners who have shared challenges with health and productivity of their forests, or maybe are looking for a collective way to access loggers and markets, which you have some examples of in Eastern Oregon. And the way private landowners work together can look really different as well. So you can have what we might call a wheel and spoke model, where the foresters and consultants and the other professionals that help landowners are kind of indirectly learning from each other's experiences and leveraging resources, but they're not actually getting the landowners together for face-to-face coordination. Probably a lot of the time we see an over-the-fence kind of pretty informal model where landowners are observing each other's activities, learning what they did, getting in touch with who helped them, and doing something similar, and maybe having a bit of dialogue about that locally. So this is pretty organic. And then you also have some examples of groups that emerge where landowners are actually coming together and saying, we want to work together and take collective action. We're going to interact directly around that. They may keep this still informal, or they might pursue something like a 501c3 nonprofit designation, like the Ritter Land Management Team, or a local cooperative, like it's been done in Baker County. But they may, again, want to give it a name, have policies and procedures, put down an organizational structure that's going to help them achieve their goals. So these kinds of models for working together obviously vary in how formal and structured they are. There's trade-offs to each. The more organized and structured you are, you might be better at attracting resources or being efficient, but more informal groups can benefit from more flexibility, particularly from not binding or requiring certain terms, and from not being process heavy when landowners and agencies have a lot of other priorities they're trying to address and don't always have time for process. So something that's important to think about is what level of formality or structure works well in one place may not so well in another. So those are some types of cross-boundary partnerships. Another way to think about them is to consider their levels of interaction. So how much are they asking participants to coordinate and integrate versus stay pretty autonomous? So we can think about partnerships as being on a continuum from more autonomous, where they don't ask as much of the players, to becoming more interdependent. And each of those points on the spectrum has different costs, risks, and benefits for folks who are participating in them. Over time, partnerships might transition from that more autonomous end of the spectrum to becoming more interdependent, or they might go back down if they're finding that being interdependent is not efficient, not working for them. So now I'm going to talk about federal forest collaboratives on federal lands, which are a different approach than what I've just described, although can be related to all lands cross-boundary partnerships. And I want to unpack the term collaborative a little bit. So collaboration generally means to work together, but in the social science literature, it refers more specifically to a form of working together in settings where public agencies like the land managers, like the Forest Service or the BLM, who are managing or regulating resources, are directly engaging with those stakeholders of those lands in consensus-oriented forums that are intended to produce common solutions. So the broad goal of collaborative governance is solutions or plans that result from seeking consensus, even if it's not always achieved and full agreement does not always occur. But they are seeking to design solutions as best as possible to achieve the multiple desired outcomes that participants might have and to address multiple resources and values. And in public participation, collaboration is distinguished from other forms in that it does promise not just that consensus seeking, but really meaningful interaction among participants. It's also a promise from the decision maker who might hold the ultimate power. That promise is, I'm going to work with you regularly as I develop a plan with you. I'm going to ask you directly what you want. We're going to work together on weighing ideas, alternatives, and solutions. So it's not just consulting and considering, it's really quite different than things on the left side of the public participation spectrum. In Oregon and around the West now, when we use the term collaborative, it's not an adjective. We tend to be using it as a noun. It's come to mean some kind of organized group that's focused on a defined area of federal forest lands, like a ranger district or a national forest unit. That's been scaling up quite a bit over time. And that has enduring relationships between stakeholders that are sustained by regular dialogue and regular meetings. So it's not a one-off process. It's continual, and the dialogue builds. What collaboratives do in the most basic sense is they convene the stakeholders of that national forest area that they're interested in, like local government, environmental groups, industry, the other agencies, and the Forest Service, for dialogue about each of their interests and values. This has historically often been in the context of a planned specific vegetation management project that's, going through or about to go through the environmental analysis or NEPA process. Groups usually try to seek consensus about what management activities they'll support. They often write down where they're able to find that agreement and where they're not, and they share that with the Forest Service. Sometimes they do this for broader things like forest management designations or issues in forests and try to articulate broader zones of agreement. The Forest Service does remain the decision maker about what happens on national forests, but collaboratives put this time in and provide this input because they're hoping that will help guide the agency's decisions. They also engage on other issues like the implementation of restoration work. So after it's done in the NEPA process and it gets awarded, this includes offering input to help the implementation project design to be economical, to be cost effective, to make sure it still reflects the values collaboratives had during NEPA, and then to be able to draw on other partners to try to leverage and bring in different funding sources too to implement it as needed. This can also help ensure that the diverse restoration activities that are important to a collaborative that maybe non-timber are going to get accomplished as well, if that's possible. And then many groups also undertake what's called multi-party monitoring so that they can learn from what's getting implemented, really to understand also, was it implemented as we hoped, and did it meet the outcomes we wanted it to have? And they often engage external partners in doing that. Why do these collaboratives exist? In 2015, I surveyed as many participants in forest collaboratives in Oregon as I could, and I found the most common motivation for the Forest Service was a social one. I had all these different motivations, and the Forest Service is really participating in order to build trust and relationships. That's number one. For everyone else who wasn't a Forest Service respondent to my survey, the most common motivation was restoring forest resiliency. And then a really important outcome for almost all respondents, though, too, was getting something done on the ground. So that shows you that people are sitting around a table, they're having conversations. It might seem far from the ground, but they're doing it because they think it's going to lead to something getting done on the ground. I think it's also important to touch a bit on what collaboratives are not. I hear a lot about the collaboratives in a really abstract way, and sometimes I hear some inaccurate things, actually. And again, on that theme that I have, if you want to work effectively with a collaborative, it's always good to understand what flavor you're dealing with here. So they aren't usually standalone organizations like a nonprofit of their own. although a few are, so Blue Mountain Forest Partners being one example. But most are administratively supported by some other organization. So the Northern Blues Forest Collaborative is supported by Wallowa Resources. They're really venues for dialogue. They're not whole organizations unto themselves. I think that's important when you think about what can they accomplish, what kind of programming might they offer, all of that, what goes to a collaborative versus might be accomplished by a nonprofit. They don't have a specific legal or other kind of authority to make decisions. The Forest Service is still the decision maker. They still decide if and how to use a collaborative's input. They are not mandated or chartered by the agency. They're third-party groups. There are some projects like through the Collaborative Forest Landscape Restoration Program that have been approved through a federal advisory committee, but that's in certain places. That's not all collaborative. So they're not actually stood up formally by the agency. And then finally, they're really not the same. They're not a uniform body, all following the same approaches or producing the same outcomes. And they really have different flavors depending on the landscapes they're working in, the forest types they're working with, and their social context. So if you know one, you may not know them all. And then I'll just add that what we're seeing these days as we just continue to scale up and try to increase our forest restoration work in places like Eastern Oregon, it's just a more complex partnership and governance landscape. I call these like meta governance questions that we're dealing with now. So we're seeing landscapes where you might have a lot going on, right? You might have a forest collaborative group. You might have some private landowner partnerships where technical assistance providers come together to help landowners. You might have a number of different strategies and projects. You might have nonprofits with a bunch of different roles, all of them using words that sound similar, all of them with similar goals. So this is complex stuff. Who works together on what? Who does what? Like, what does that org chart look like in the area, if you will? And this can be a watch out situation where you can get duplicative or inefficient arrangements, or it can be a real opportunity to leverage partnerships and have a high capacity landscape. So it really varies. I'm just going to finish up here with a couple overall considerations about collective action for forest restoration. These apply to both all lands partnerships and collaboratives. One is to recognize that not everyone comes to the table. These groups don't always represent everyone. For some, that's because the flavor of the effort is not a match for them. It doesn't fit their structure, their culture, or their needs, or they don't have the time or resources to do this. It doesn't align with their work or their lives. For some, they can view this as a coming together to work with others as a watering down or diminishment of their power. And or they might have other pathways for accomplishing their goals that they prefer. So these are some of the reasons why you don't always see everyone at the table all the time. I'm also always asked for, like, what are the keys to success? How does this work? Give me 5 bullet points. And I don't like that question. There are a lot of best principles. There's endless literature. But so much depends. I'm just going to give you the social science answer. Like, so much depends on who's involved, what you're trying to do, what the problem is, what scale you want to work at. Just like how the biophysical aspects of forest restoration are site-specific, so it's the social fabric of forest management. But there are still some important aspects to pay attention to. And working together to get things done on the ground takes work off the ground. Social work that is less tangible, it's less visible, but it's still crucial. So this includes making sure that the structure you're using to work together fits what you're trying to do and fits who you all are. So if it's too formal or too informal, if it's not regularly examined, that can all pose challenges. These projects can involve a lot of different ownerships and different players who are taking on different aspects, and they're all facing different regulations, rules, and contexts. So it's sort of like piecing together that puzzle of who can do what, who's going to play on this team. And then finally, you want to think about the sequencing of treatments across space and time, how to achieve goals, how to be strategic, and whose property and whose issues are addressed in what order and how equitable is that. You want to be able to monitor and understand outcomes and adapt and change. And then you want to be able to sustain the effort over time and make sure it has the resources that it needs. I hope that you leave our panel today realizing that collective action takes hard work, but can offer a lot of advantages, including the opportunity to hear diverse perspectives and values, to interact with scientists, managers, stakeholders, landowners, all kinds of people, and to combine skills and resources from multiple sources so that you can plan and implement work more effectively than you could alone. So thank you. I look forward to hearing from others.
Thank you so much, Emily. That was a really great overview of the structure of collaboratives. I'll just remind folks that we'll be doing a Q&A session following all of our speakers at 11:35. So you're welcome to type your questions in now, but they'll be handled at the end of the presentations. Our next set of speakers will delve more into a specific set of collaboratives and all lands partnerships that are happening in the Blue Mountain region. I've gotten to meet several of these people through some of these efforts, and I'm really happy to introduce them. Our first speaker is Pam Hardy. She is an attorney with the Western Environmental Law Center and a member of several forest collaboratives in Central and Eastern Oregon. And she will be giving a presentation titled Blue Mountain Forest Partners in the Southern Blues. Pam, you can share your screen if you're there.
Great, thank you so much. All right, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. What I'm going to be doing is starting with a short little 8-minute video, and then I'm going to take you a little bit more in depth than you can actually go in an 8-minute video. So that's going to be our first round. Sound optimized for video clip and share. Okay, can everybody see that?
We can.
After a forest fire, a succession of creatures flocks into the woods. First come the beetles to eat the trees, and then the woodpeckers follow to eat the beetles.
Is everybody hearing this?
Yes.
Then in many forests, after a forest fire, a succession of creatures flocks into the woods. First come the beetles to eat the trees, and then the woodpeckers follow to eat the beetles. Then in many forests, the loggers come to cut down the trees, and the environmentalists follow to stop them. But not in this stretch of Eastern Oregon.
Get lower.
Here, the loggers and environmentalists come into the woods together.
Hold on. Okay, now go. There's a Lewis's flying over there.
Lewis alert!
This is the Blue Mountains Forest Partners. They're a type of group called a forest collaborative, and they've been so successful at finding common ground that environmentalists haven't filed a single anti-logging lawsuit in the Malheur National Forest since 2003.
So, did this pencil out?
This is about as easy as logging gets. I don't hesitate to say that this was the best sale we've had in years.
It might not seem like a big deal to see environmentalists and loggers walking together in the woods, but in the Northwest, it is.
If you enter this area, you may be subject to arrest.
In the 1980s, environmentalists protested timber sales across the region, sparking what was called the Timber Wars.
Buried to their waist, chained at the neck, and encased in concrete, environmentalists blockaded this logging road, leading to valuable old-growth timber.
By the late 90s, they had managed to severely limit logging in federal forests, which crushed timber-dependent towns like John Day.
I can't even name the amount of kids I grew up with that families lost jobs at the mill, lost whole logging companies, and businesses started to close down. Slowly but surely, you start to wonder if you're going to be.
Zach Williams' family goes back 5 generations in the area. He watched his father close their sawmill, and he says locals blamed environmentalists for locking up the trees.
So there is logging that completed. It's important to note that we did challenge all of the area.
Susan Jane Brown is an environmental lawyer based in Portland who kept blocking logging on the Malheur National Forest.
At that point in our lives, Susan Jane Brown were extremely dirty words to say around here.
I certainly was concerned about my safety at times. I had been run out of town before. I'd been tailgated by pickup trucks. I've had air let out of my tires, that sort of thing.
Follow me.
So how did these two groups go from enemies
Chickens are going to cross the road
to tromping through the woods together? What it took was a few locals realizing that they couldn't beat Susan Jane in the courtroom. So they invited her to Grant County to see if they could find some way to manage the forest that would meet both their goals.
Let's get started. Why don't you sit down, please? Some of those early meetings, we're in a large room. Industry and community members are on one side of it, the environmental communities on the other, and we have a third-party facilitator that's walking back and forth between us because we couldn't talk to one another. It was that bad, almost that poisonous.
They couldn't agree on much, but they could agree on one thing. They were going to follow the science, even if that meant questioning their core beliefs. Mallory Davies gave us a tour of one of several studies initiated by the collaborative.
This is the very edge of our research unit, a large area, high-intensity burn fire. It's called the Canyon Creek Complex.
Loggers historically rush in to harvest burned timber like this in what's called salvage logging. To them, leaving wood to decay is like watching money rot on trees, to say nothing of providing fuel for future wildfires. But to environmentalists and scientists, these dead trees are essential habitat for many animals, especially woodpeckers.
This is our peeper cam, so we could peep nests that we can't reach with our hand.
So the Blue Mountains Forest Partners worked with the Forest Service to create this study. They logged test sites at different levels, ranging from cutting no trees to cutting most of them. And then they tracked how the woodpeckers fared.
So on my monitor, I can see that there are 6 white tiny eggs on top of a little bit of wood chips. So there's a possibility that they're still laying.
The goal is to find a level of salvage logging that provides an economic benefit to the local community without compromising woodpecker habitat. And preliminary results suggest that selective logging has minimal negative impact on Lewis's woodpeckers and white-headed woodpeckers, but that it appears to cause a slow decline in the nesting numbers of black-backed woodpeckers.
We all took risks on this type of project, so I'm curious what folks think. And it's okay if you hate it.
But nobody seemed to hate it.
I mean, Susan Jane detests salvage logging, and if I'm being honest, I look at this burn, 110,000 acres, and look at salvaging 5,000 of it and think, how is that really going to harm habitat? And I'm not going to say that I think any differently necessarily about that, but that's the point of collaboration. And if this is the kind of process we have to go through, then it worked.
I agree, and I don't want this to be a one-off. And we can do salvage, and we can take logs to the mill, and people can earn a living wage, and we also don't have to kill a bunch of birds in the process.
If the first ingredient of the Blue Mountains Forest Partners' success was following the science,
oh my God, that's amazing.
Everyone agrees there was a second ingredient to their secret mix.
Oh, alcohol. It's partially a joke.
Sharing a beer or bourbon or having a meal together is a really great way to break down barriers and to get rid of all of that baggage that we come to these conversations with. And it allows us to have some fun together.
And like many trusted friends, that fun now includes being able to laugh at themselves. Case in point. It was Mallory and the field crew who made this piñata to celebrate the end of the study.
A little higher, go!
Perhaps the greatest test of this partnership came in 2012, when Grant County's last sawmill announced it was closing for a lack of timber. By then, science had convinced the environmentalists that selective logging was necessary to manage the overgrown forest. So they joined with the timber industry to support a long-term logging and restoration project to keep the mill open, create new jobs, and make the forest more resilient to wildfire and climate change.
In 2003, had you asked me if I ever would have felt this way about any of these people, no way, man. There's just no way. These people are crazy, but now they're my crazy. They're my friends, I care about them, and just like any friendship, you want your friends to be happy and healthy and successful. And now that these folks are my friends, that's what I want for them.
Thanks so much. I hope that mostly came through on the other side.
everything you need to get anything done, now in one place.
Sorry about that. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and pull up my PowerPoint now. Great. Can folks see that?
Yes.
Excellent. So what I want to do today is actually take you behind the scenes a little bit, take you backstage, and talk about some of the folks that didn't actually make the front page of the video. That video is such a good description of who we are. And by necessity, every time somebody comes out and does a little story about us, the reality is that the media just simplifies it down to a few people. But if you look at all of those circles, there's always a lot of people standing in them. I don't have anywhere near the time to share with you the vast diversity of people who actually participate in these things. But I do want to tell the Blue Mountain Forest Partners story just a little bit through the lens of looking at a couple of the other individuals who don't always make the front page. So there's Susan Jane, who was I would say, one of the stars of our show here. And there's Mark Webb, who is our facilitator, executive director, the person who holds us together at the center right now. And here's a picture where you can see a few more of us. And once again, those are the three people who we had highlighted in our great little video. And you can see down there Zach, who I couldn't pick out of the other one. But, whoops. These are some of the folks that I want to focus on now. That guy in the middle, Jerry Franklin, I think all of you know him. And I want to say that, as I'm speaking with a group of foresters, Jerry has made an enormous difference in terms of helping us come together. He wrote this, or he did not, but many people got together to write this early on. I think Jerry's actually wearing the same red checkered shirt in this picture as he is on the front of this book. But so much of our success has come from that time in the woods together. And as Zach said, spending that time after hours, getting to know each other. And it's by spending time in the woods with people who really know what they're doing and pushing the ideas around that has made the biggest difference. But Jerry gets a lot of the headlines, so I'm going to move on from him. And I'm going to talk about somebody else who's been truly instrumental in making the Blue Mountain Forest Partners work. And that is Dave Hannibal. Dave works with Grayback Forestry. He's the crew leader for the area. Dave has been a part of the board since the very beginning, and his participation has been of enormous assistance because what he brings to the circle is a real understanding for everybody else of what's practical and what's not. Dave has implemented prescribed fire. Dave has implemented all of these pre-commercial and non-commercial projects that we're talking about. Dave can bring people like me out into the forest and show me a prescription and say, look what's going on. And I can understand it. Me as, an environmental advocate who, I have some undergrad training in wildlife biology, but this guy really understands what's going on. And really show me how it works and how it doesn't work, just like Zach can do. And this participation from somebody who is deeply involved in the non-commercial work has been absolutely essential to keeping our board together and making sure that we are truly grounded in what's going on in the real world. Trent Sager has also been an incredibly valuable participant. In 2017, the Blue Mountain Forest Partners came out with these aspen zones of agreement. And this is the front cover of it. It should say by Trent Sager because he did a tremendous amount of the work in putting these together. And I highlight this because none of this work could take place without somebody sitting down and just doing all the writing, bringing all the ideas together, putting together a first draft, finding out, doing the literature review, taking the conversations that we've had in the field and organizing them down into, I think this is what I heard everybody say. I think this is what everybody agrees on, and then presenting it to us in the form of an actual document. So these zones of agreement are incredibly important to the collaborative, because as we go through the actual writing down of the words that we agree on, we come to a better understanding of where we agree and where we disagree. And we actually have something that we can hand to the Forest Service and say, here's what we understand, here's what we think is actually making sense. And scientists like Trent currently works for Sustainable Northwest. Scientists like Trent and his support in doing that, and his support in actually getting the stuff written down, has been absolutely critical. Tyson Bertoni Riggs has also been an incredible asset. And Tyson, he has done the hard work of being involved on the policy side for us. He currently works for Rural Voices for Conservation Coalition. And he's the one who parses out things like the Federal Forest Restoration Program, reads through the details, and helps us understand. I think that when this photograph was taken, I think that he was currently the representative for ODF. And he has since moved on to Rural Voices for Conservation. But that and the Collaborative Forest Landscape Restoration Program, and somebody who is willing to take the work and go into the details and write out the specifics of the policy, those people are absolutely invaluable to allowing collaboration to really happen. Things like, we call it the CFLRP program. Things like the CFLRP program are incredibly valuable in terms of giving groups, collaboratives, some level of motivation to actually come together and try and get it done, because this money comes to the Forest Service specifically for implementing projects that are collaboratively agreed to. And so the motivation to get something collaboratively agreed to really goes up. People really try and get this work done. And projects like the Federal Forest Restoration Program that I just had before provide a lot of money for technical assistance. And, things like, we have a question the collaborative doesn't understand, we'd like scientists to come in and help us understand how this works, and also for basic facilitation of the collaborative programs. And as Mark Webb said on that, in the video, there are some times when we do not see eye to eye, and facilitation is really important. Then I want to highlight a couple of folks that are a lot harder to actually caption photographs, because James is almost always the one who is behind the camera. James and Amanda, and obviously a bunch of other people, some of whom I think are here in this program. I think Sky just presented to us. James has helped us write a number of zones of agreement as well. He's helping us on some zones right now. But it's their original research on these forests and peer-reviewed publications that have really made a difference in terms of all of the people in these groups coming to a basic common understanding of facts. It is hours and hours in the woods of standing there with people who see the woods differently and asking questions, and not just asking questions and getting an answer, but asking questions and getting an answer that is more detailed and nuanced than I even knew there was detail and nuance to offer, that scientists like this really bring to the table. And so I had to throw in a little picture of James. That's off his Oregon State University. He's a professor now at Oregon State University, or I think technically a research associate, but I'm not actually sure the difference. And Amanda Lindsay, that's her right there on the end, and she works for the Forest Service. I do want to take just a moment to say, Amanda is the only Forest Service employee that I'm going to be able to highlight here today just because of time. But our Forest Service employees have been an incredible asset. And being able to go out into the field with so many people who really know their stuff and are really interested in engaging in that relationship building and engaging in that trust building, that kind of, one-on-one in the field where you can point to what's going on is so much of what makes this work. And then I want to scale this through the past and through the future. I bet a few of you know this guy. This is Tim Lilleboe. And when I first came to the Blue Mountain Forest Partners in 2014, I was filling in behind Tim. And one of the things that I kept saying to people, I did the same on a couple of other collaboratives as well. One of the things I would say to people as I filled in and came around to these different places is I felt like as I moved around the state, I would find these beautiful little secret gardens of friendship that Tim had built. And as I would open up the door and I would get welcomed in, primarily because I was following in his footsteps. Tim Lilleboe, for those who don't know who he is, he was one of the founders of Oregon Wild back in the early 70s and was with the organization for 40 years before his death in 2014. And he started life, he was early on, he actually was a logger himself. And then as he started to realize that things were out of balance, he dedicated his life to actually making sure that some of the forest remained in place. But I came in and I found these secret little gardens, people who really understood and talked to each other. And one of the things that we say in the collaborative world a lot is that we move at the speed of trust. And that's something that I really have to credit everybody who's involved for working hard to do. But I really have to give a lot of that credit to a lot of that early work to this guy, Tim Lilleboe, who really worked hard to build trust and built trust across a lot of historically unexpected boundaries. And then I want to look to the future. This is Marley Goska, and this is a picture taken last week. She just graduated from law school, and she's now an intern with Welk. And she'll be working with myself and Susan Jane Brown to try and understand a little bit more about how this collaboration thing works and how to do it in real life. And it has been just such a joy to have so many people come around and study us and ask questions. And Emily Jane did a perfect job of describing the structures of what is a collaborative and how does it work. But I just want to offer that what actually makes this work, what actually moves it forward, is the relationships. It's the messiness of the social ecosystem. It's everyone sitting down one-on-one and having that cup of coffee or having a beer together. I can't tell you how many times that evening scene with the woodpecker, well, we don't usually get a woodpecker piñata, but evening scene of everyone sitting around on the back deck and laughing and telling stories. At first you talk about this and you talk about that, but not too long into it, and you all get to talking about forest policy and forest science and what about this, and I think that, and da-da-da. Because we're all a bunch of forest geeks, we all love trees. And that's where the real juice happens. And so I just encourage all of you, as you're moving forward, a super practical idea for how to really make collaboration work is show up and talk to people, call them up and get to know them. And especially these new ones into the scene. Because if we don't pass this on to the next generation, we're going to go back to the old ways of doing business that didn't work for us near as well.
Thanks, Pam. What a great presentation. I really appreciate all your insight there into the collaborative process and building trust with all the various folks who are involved. I want to move on to our next speaker. Up next is Nils Christofferson. He's Executive Director of Wallowa Resources, an organization he's been with for over 2 decades now. Nils will be giving a presentation titled Partnerships in the Northern Blue Mountains. And thanks, Nils. Looks like you got your screen up.
Morning, everybody. It's great to be here. Thank you, Andrew, and thank you, Emily, Jane, and Pam for teeing this all up. I'm going to turn off my video too, just because my system's been a little unstable this morning. Hopefully this will work. And before I plow into it, I also just want to give a shout out to everybody that's come before, especially the people in the research session this morning. I thought you all did a fabulous job, and it was great to see that research and its relevance here to Eastern Oregon, because it really helps inform the work that we're doing in the Northern Blues and the Southern Blues. Everybody in these collaboratives and partnerships places a great deal of value on what you're doing. So thank you. The Northern Blues All Lands Partnership. It's a big deal. It's come together. It's really, I mean, the origin stories are really 20, 25 years long, but it is, currently a partnership centered on an all land shared stewardship approach where partners work under a large landscape view across ownership boundaries to identify shared priorities and actions to produce a healthy and resilient forest, as well as resilient and vibrant rural communities. Core funding coming into the All Lands Partnership is from the Collaborative Forest Landscape Restoration Program, similar to what Pam referenced in the Southern Blues, as well as Farm Bill funding, EQIP dollars through NRCS to support approved practices on private forests. And the partnership is pursuing a range of matching and leveraging opportunities from public, tribal, and private sources as we build alignment. It's a 10 million acre sort of partnership area. It's centered on the 2 national forests of the Umatilla National Forest and the Wallowa-Whitman National Forest that have common boundaries, forest habitat, watersheds, and shared objectives, as well as a history that influences current conditions and disturbance events and effects and relationships with the local communities. It is the All Lands vision includes not just the 2 national forests, but the private, both industrial and family forests, private lands, tribal lands, and state lands. The Northern Blues Cohesive Wildfire Strategy boundary is our ultimate delineation. Let me just close the windows here. And it reflects these communities, the infrastructure that we have, fire management resources, et cetera, of the 2 forests. And within this area is similar to all of Eastern Oregon. There are extensive areas of wilderness and roadless areas, and the active restoration is really targeted around those areas and hopefully facilitating beneficial wildfire within the protected areas. We've got 2 overarching goals: resilient landscapes, resilient to wildfire, drought, pests, diseases that incorporate integrated watershed management. There's a recognition, as we've heard from multiple speakers yesterday and earlier today, about a loss of diversity, increased homogeneity across the landscape, and a desire to move these conditions that are more resilient, using the historic range as reference points, but understanding that climate change is having significant effects, and we need to really continue to learn what resilience looks like in a climate altered future. Second goal is resilient rural communities, and we want to achieve that by creating and maintaining those resilient forests. So intentionally trying to ensure we're generating natural resource jobs within this region that we've got attention to and benefit to recreation and tourism, public health, including clean water, clean air, smoke management, et cetera, and public safety, not just public safety of our communities, but also of our first responders and wildland firefighters. And the partnership has evolved through, as I said, sort of 25 plus years of slow emerging collaboration. And a lot of it got started back in the early 90s, both as the Forest Service under Jack Ward Thomas started thinking about ecosystem management as the driving paradigm for public land management, and as the Pacific Northwest really understood the critical importance of addressing salmon restoration, salmon habitat restoration in the interior Columbia Basin. And in those efforts, you began to see local, more informal collaborative efforts and partnerships begin to form, begin to work together, begin to build that alignment, leverage resources, and achieve real on the ground results, but at more smaller localized scales. And that eventually led to forest collaboratives that started for both the Willow-Whitman and the Umatilla National Forest. And subsequent to that, the merger of those two collaboratives to create a combined Northern Blues Forest Collaborative working to support the management on both the Willow-Whitman and the Umatilla National Forest. In parallel with this, you've got, which makes it, that's where Emily Jane's presentation, I think, was brilliant. You've got a partnership working specifically on family forest land in Northeast Oregon called My Blue Mountains Woodlands, mirrored off of successful efforts in the Midwest, particularly in Wisconsin, but adapted to our location. And then, of course, you've got the Blue Mountain Cohesive Strategy pilot. And in between all this, the story could be a lot longer. But remember too, Bill Gamble's story about East Face as a Joint Chiefs project, because that also helped pull many of these pieces together in our first large landscape all lands restoration effort. So I'm going to just walk through the three key pieces here that join to support the CFLRP for the Northern Blues. But before I do, I also just want to re-emphasize that one of the points Bill Gamble made yesterday, that outside of these sort of forested landscape partnerships and collaboratives, there's a tremendous amount of continued partnership and investment for aquatic and salmon restoration that continues to take place. And they're not as central to the work of the collaboratives because there's so much more consensus and agreement on what needs to be done and how to do it, that they're just able to keep going. So you've got the tribes, the watershed councils, local governments, lots of private landowners, and federal agencies working on a lot of aquatic and salmon habitat restoration projects that are contributing to this large landscape view, but don't really need this social license building that we're doing here. In the Northern Blues Forest Collaborative, it is, as Emily Jane spoke to, it's a diverse group of stakeholders. They have a shared vision of forest resilience and community vitality across the Northern Blue Mountains. And our goal really is to try to support our learning, collective learning about the current conditions and drivers and risks to this forest, and also how best to help the Forest Service respond to those risks, how to rebuild social license and support and trust, as Pam spoke to get more work done, to help really accelerate the pace and scale, but also the quality of landscape restoration in the Northern Blues. And you know, that when the two collaboratives merged to become the Northern Blues Forest Collaborative, there was already a number of existing projects ongoing, some getting closer to completion, like East Face, that are part and parcel of now this unified Northern Blues Forest Collaborative work plan. As we move forward, we're really looking at expanding multi-party monitoring efforts so that we can build that collective learning and use that and the projects that we're working on to develop zones of agreement that become better guidance to where we are as a group of stakeholders working with the Forest Service on where to move in the future, so that we don't have to work as intensively on a project by project basis, but we can build those agreements to provide a better roadmap for public land management moving forward, and hopefully reduce the level of conflict and conflict that has occurred in the past. And then a number of specific research projects that we're working on with various partners. My Blue Mountain Woodlands, so another part of the three-legged stool here is that this suite of partners listed on this slide originally formed, the very inception of it was John Buckman at ODF, Paul Esther at OSU Extension, and myself talking about this fact that is shown here, that's really coming up from probably 7-8 years ago when we first sat down in John Buckman's table in LeGrand and recognized the truth of this in Northeast Oregon, and agreed that we were more likely to be successful with outreach and engagement and support to private landowners, particularly with the mix of private landowners and the transition in ownership and the increased representation of absentee owners in the region, if we all work together, if we tried to use our individual channels of communication and relationships and influence to highlight the importance of private landowners developing management plans, thinking about their spot within a larger landscape, and investing in a more sort of collective action framework, to use Emily Jane's words from earlier today. And in doing that, we recognize kind of this pathway to engagement, the need to mobilize, do outreach and engagement to mobilize individual landowners, and then to develop landowner networks within specific areas, recognizing the power of peer-to-peer relationships within each county, within each watershed area, to do learning, to do more extension education work, field-based demonstrations, and then deliver money to the ground to get management plans and projects done with incentives to do work that is reflective of the best available science and this sort of alignment of goals and objectives to achieve larger landscape impact. This, again, we also borrowed from the Midwest, this idea of stewardship networks that has proven really effective in Wisconsin, Minnesota, and other in Michigan, and beginning to look at how do we do that here? How do we, as a group of private landowners and supporting federal, state, local entities, work to create strong local stewardship networks that are collectively learning and collectively recognizing the importance of addressing the issues of forest and community resilience at a larger scale, and that each landowner really is a meaningful part of the end solution. The third part of the three-legged stool for our partnership is the Northern Blues Cohesive Strategy Partnership. I think many of you are aware of the key pillars of this. It's improved wildfire response, fire-adapted communities, and resilient landscapes. It is a mix of local government, state, and federal agencies that are all united behind that goal. And here in the Northern Blues, this is who's involved. And again, that similar sort of, that's actually the dispatch area, but speaking to the same region that we're working on with the Northern Blues Partnership. And I want to thank each of our partners for helping me put together these slides while I'm doing it here. Willie Crippen fired these off to me last night. But it is, working again at all tiers to try to think clearly about the coordination of our safe and effective response to fire, how we manage not only the response to fire, but the communication with local government and homeowners, and protect them and where needed, manage a safe and effective evacuation, trying to get ahead of the problem with clear investments in resilient landscapes, and then working at a local level, all these partners. And here again, there's a bridge to My Blue Mountain Woodlands, thinking about really trying to get more fire-wise communities in place here in the Northern Blues, that where homeowners are working together to address risks to a homeowners association or a suite of neighbors, again, across boundaries. With all those pieces come together to support the Northern Blues landscape restoration effort. The first 3 to 4 years are really about existing NEPA-ready acres that fall in particular emphasis areas, and those are outlined in black here. The Baker City watershed, this area we call the LeGrand watershed. It's kind of a broad statement about what it is. Meacham, the Western Blues, the Joseph Creek area, and the Wallowa Front. Those are the initial emphasis areas. Oh, sorry, and Kaler over here. Those are existing emphasis areas where we had NEPA-ready projects, as well as priorities and partners and dollars ready to work on adjacent private lands.
And Nils, I just want to give you about a 2-minute warning.
Perfect. I'm just wrapping up. And all of this is structured. This looks fairly complicated, but it's actually coming together quite nicely. So within those emphasis areas, we've got project teams where the different partners are represented in each of these project teams. We've got resource teams trying to really build the skills, capacity, knowledge that we need to inform effective action, but also to keep the public informed. We've got the leadership team representing landowners and primary investors in this effort, and local government. And then an operations team that kind of acts as the central nervous system, the hub, to try to ensure there's coordination and forward planning for all of these entities. We have 2 all lands partnership meetings, one in the spring and one in the fall. We just had one on May 6th, and we're going to have one again in the fall to broadly share plans and results from this effort. And we've summed all that up in this beautiful little graphic image. That's it for me.
Thank you so much, Nils, for that presentation. A lot of really great work that you've been engaged in over the past few years and past couple decades, really. I want to move on to our last speaker. Our last speaker is Jay Gibbs. He is the team leader with the Natural Resources Conservation Service in the John Day, Umatilla, and Snake Basins. And he will be giving a presentation titled Agency Partnerships, Oregon Department of Forestry and Natural Resource Conservation Service. Jay, are you there? If you could start sharing your screen.
Good morning, Andrew. Yeah, I've got 50 or 60 slides to load up. Not really. I don't have any slides. Can everybody hear me just fine?
We can hear you.
Okay, there I am. Have my camera on. Hey, good morning, and thank you for the invite. Yeah, I really don't have any slides, and I think I can catch you up a little bit there. Looks like a great agenda and a really knowledgeable audience. It's always intimidating to a range conservationist by training to be invited to these forestry panels. So I thank you and bear with me. One of the nice things about going last in a panel discussion is I can either just say ditto, or I can try to maybe nibble around the edges and try to add a little value and not repeat what's said. I appreciate all the other panelists. They covered a lot of the great points and either highlighted or laid the foundation for how and why partnerships or collaboratives are so successful in addressing some of the complex forest health related systems that we're working on today. From my perspective, as a non-forestry trained individual, it seems to me that they're the only way to get things done. I do remember back from my days at Oregon State where I had a professor that told me that ecosystems aren't more complex than I think they are. They're more complex than you can possibly imagine. So that's always resonated with me that, I need to surround myself with some really smart people. The NRCS ODF partnership that I've been tasked with talking about for a little bit today probably has a much longer history than some may suspect. Prior to the 1990 Farm Bill, which was called the Food, Agricultural Conservation and Trade Act of 1990, that kind of rolls off the tongue, right? Actually, the Soil Conservation Service, which was the predecessor to NRCS, and the Agricultural Stabilization and Conservation Service, or ASCS, which was the predecessor to the Farm Service Agency, we jointly administered the Agricultural Conservation Program. And back then, cost share was limited to a whopping $3,500 a year per person. $3,500 went a lot further back in 1960s, 70s, and 80s than it does today. But what was unique is NRCS, or SCS at the time, we serviced all the requests for rangeland and cropland, but Oregon Department of Forestry actually serviced all the requests through the Agricultural Conservation Program for forest lands in Oregon. So let's fast forward to 2014, 2015. Had a number of things going on, which was very eloquently referred to by Nils. That was some of that foundational stuff. We had some catastrophic wildfires in our rearview mirror. Local interest was drumming up. Joint Chiefs was just coming into play, and myself and John Buckman had a conversation, and we thought it was a good idea over the hood of a truck to pilot I think it was $150,000 agreement between NRCS and ODF for ODF to essentially do what they historically had done in the past, recognizing their expertise. We had some great leadership at the time. The heads of the two agencies, the state conservationist and the state forester, gave us the latitude to try to pilot this. that little $150,000 investment that started out in Northeast Oregon, I think we may have amended it once. We added some more money to it. Then we went and we expanded the coverage to cover the entire state of Oregon. We funded it at $1 million. We amended that agreement at least once to add additional money to it. And then here just recently, we just completed a $2 million agreement with ODF to continue that assistance for the next 5 years. I fully anticipate that ODF will consume that $2 million prior to the 5 years, and that we will go in and amend that agreement, and to use the terminology, we'll top the tank off and we'll bring that funding level back up to the $2 million. I think what's key to this, as we get into this, is it was alluded to, NRCS, our cost share programs are the Environmental Quality Incentive Program, and that's the one that Neil's referred to. That's our bread and butter. That's our pull yourself up by your bootstraps program. It's limited to, our only audience is in the forested landscape is the non-industrial private forest landowners. And coincidentally or not coincidentally, that's the same audience that ODF has. But the big difference is in the state of Oregon, NRCS has one forester. He lives in Portland. I think he's really good, but he's only one person. ODF they have the Rolodex of all the non-industrial private landowners across the state of Oregon. They have the relationships, they have the expertise, they have the infrastructure in their field, their area offices, district foresters, unit foresters in their field offices. And most importantly, they have the trust of that non-industrial private forest land audience, and they interface with industry as well. We don't have those relationships. There's no way that if NRCS took $2 million, that we could achieve the same outcome as $2 million invested with ODF does. They put far more boots on the ground. They're shaking far more hands. They're impacting a much larger, exponentially larger landscape and clientele that we can. I think one of the keys in the partnership, and it was alluded to by both Mary Jane and is that is recognizing what people bring to the table. Different agencies bring different things. In NRCS, we bring financial assistance. We bring the cost share dollars to the table, and ODF brings the expertise. And I think we're seeing a number of, any successful collaborative or partnership begins to spawn ancillary or secondary benefits. And here just recently, Northeast Oregon Department of Forestry applied for and successfully received a $5 million regional conservation partnership program. One of the key pieces of that grant application was ODF's success in historically interfacing and working with NRCS on other grants. Obviously, ODF, they hit that one out of the park. They could cite 6 years, millions of dollars, thousands of touches as a success point on a successful partnership. Partnerships and collaborations aren't new. They're not unique. But I think some of the scale that you heard referred to today in Oregon, Joint Chiefs, RCPP, these collaboratives, not just in Northeast Oregon, they're all across the state of Oregon. I think the scale that we're currently striving to work in is unique. So Andrew or Jacob, I'd leave it at that and I'll open it up to questions. I'll save you some time right
there. Thanks, Jay. That was really great. I'm always really interested in learning about the collaboration between ODF and NRCS, and they're both major collaborators with the tribe I work for as well. But sometimes the unique opportunities through the different agencies is something that I always enjoy learning more about. I'd like to welcome all of the speakers from this session to turn on their videos and their mics again, and we'll start opening up for general questions and answers from the session. The first question that I have here, and this goes to you, Jay, how does NRCS Forest Technical Assistance Providers fit into the mix with the partnership established with ODF?
It starts at the real local level. We rely on the local district conservationists to work with other tribes or with the Oregon Department of Forestry and unit foresters and stewardship foresters. As that trickle down gets down to where to work and the best science and what to do when you get there, they tell us where to go, and then we're able to invest there, provide the opportunity for sign up and participation, and then we move that over to ODF. When a landowner comes in and says trees, we send them to ODF. It's just recognizing they are the experts in that field. So I hope that addressed that question. I hope it does. Did I hit it, David?
Thanks, Jay.
Yeah, this is Dave, actually. Well, it doesn't leave much room for the technical service providers there to provide that service, if it's always being transferred over to ODF. I actually live in Tillamook and have a good relationship with our district conservationist here, and try and support them, in terms of finding business for them, which NRCS can support. But I just think it's just really important to, I think, sort of have a level playing field, if possible, between NRCS technical service providers and the Oregon Department of Forestry. That's really just what I'd like.
Okay, I see where you're coming from.
Yeah.
Yes, and thank you, David. And I missed the target. We don't have a lot of technical service providers in Eastern Oregon, so we are somewhat limited. They seem to be more prevalent in Western Oregon than they do here. But we work very closely with the private consulting foresters to make sure that there's plenty of bandwidth there. There's seems to be plenty of opportunity for everybody to be successful. And again, that's a really key thing. But we don't have a lot of, I think there's maybe 2 TSPs in all of Eastern Oregon.
Thanks. I don't see any more questions coming in, so I encourage folks to start putting them down if they have any questions. I'll lead with a question. I have a question for Pam Hardy. And, one of the things I see in some of these videos and the outreach about kind of the timber wars and how things shifted in Eastern Oregon around doing kind of landscape scale restorations, there's a shift from seeing the logging industry as being antagonistic to a lot of the conservation values that people have on the landscape to now seeing them as a partner. And I just wonder how you've seen that shift. When was there a tipping point in your work or in your own mind? And if you could speak a little bit to that.
Yeah, that's a great question, because, and I really appreciate your putting it down to the individual, because it does change one person at a time. And, as the conservation movement has grown and matured, different people have these opportunities at different times. And I think it really has to do with that one-on-one relationship. And so my personal experience was I started with Oregon Wild. I no longer work for them. I now work for the Western Environmental Law Center, but I started with Oregon Wild, like I said in the presentation, shortly after Tim Lolobo passed away in 2014. And at that time, I was definitely one of those people who couldn't imagine that there was anything useful that you could do with a chainsaw in the woods, and was really surprised, frankly. Was really surprised to learn otherwise. And, and I can't say that there was like a particular day. Let me tell one short little story, since it doesn't seem like a zillion questions are popping in, but I will tell one short little story about a particularly impressive day. And I was probably 3 or 4 months into my time with the Blue Mountain Forest Partners. I was still completely wet behind the ears, and I was still really trying to understand the science. And we were out looking at a salvage logging operation. I can't remember which fire it was, but I was standing around in the circle, and one of the other characters there was Mike Billman, who I think a lot of you know, and who I still have the opportunity to work with now. At the time, he was working for Malheur Lumber. He was working for the mill. And what had happened on the site was that in the name of roadside hazard removal, they had come through and removed only the largest trees. And there were still quite a lot of very dangerous, smaller trees that could easily have fallen right on the road. And so it really felt like this was not really a legit roadside hazard operation. This was, just taking the biggest trees for the economic value and not actually solving the problem. And I did not at the time know how to articulate that very well. And we were going around the circle saying what we were going to say, and I was a little tongue-tied. And Mike Billman, who was at that time the mill rep, said what I just said, probably with twice the eloquence with which I just said it. And he said, and the way he prefaced it was, let me say what Tim would have said. And that was the moment at which I realized that we were playing a whole different game. That I thought it was about us versus them and negotiation. And I realized at that moment that that's not the game that I'm in. I mean, that's part of the game that I'm in, but there's so many more layers to this. It's about the trust. It's about the relationship. It's about the loyalty. It's about the honesty and integrity and authenticity. And when I saw that, like so clearly, so evidently, all in one fell swoop, I think that was a really important moment for me where I realized, oh, we have to deal with everyone here as real people, and this is how we're going to be moving forwards. So.
Thank you so much. My Zoom crashed for about the 3 minutes that you're speaking. I missed everyone else. I'll have to hear another day. And in that process, my chat was lost. I don't know if Jacob or John, if you see some questions that have popped up in the last few minutes.
Yeah, there's a couple questions that popped up. So this one's for EJ. Is there a simple distinction between a collaborative and partnership?
Yeah, so this will be my definition. Others may have different ones, but I would say that forest collaboratives with a capital C, and Nils refers to this in his, or big C is something we talk about, are stakeholders of public lands focused on dialogue about their values and interests and trying to articulate common ground that the Forest Service then may use to implement. Partnerships are different. Some of those interests might be included too, but they are different groups and agencies working together to try to plan and essentially coordinate something. And these both involve processes for working together, understanding each other's values, all of that. But I'd say the difference is collaboration and consensus building versus coordination and cooperation among entities. It's just a little bit different. Your question here about collaboratives in Western Oregon. So again, using that definition of like a federal forest collaborative, there have been several stewardship groups on the Siuslaw National Forest looking at kind of different watersheds and then making decisions about how they like to see retained receipts from stewardship contracting spent on other restoration projects. And they are now also forming a forest-wide collaborative that will provide input during the NEPA process, more similar to the model that you see in Eastern Oregon. And there are also collaboratives down in southwestern Oregon as well, like the Wild Rivers Coast Forest Collaborative. There are not up in the northwestern corner of the state where you don't really have federal land, federal forest land.
Okay, Andrew, I think that we're caught up. So please, if anybody has any other questions, please type them in the chat. And Andrew, I'll turn it back over to you.
Great, thanks for filling in, Jake.
You know, I have a question if we're not getting any chat questions popping up. I have a question for Emily Jane. Emily Jane, seeing no.
Please go.
Okay, I was going to say seeing nobody objecting to my asking a question. One thing I would love to ask you is one of the things that down at the Blue Mountain Forest Partners at the on the southern end of the Blue Mountains, we think of as really important is really that after hours time. You know, sitting around telling stories, literally staying up sometimes until 1 or 2 in the morning and kibitzing about this stuff. How unique are we in that? Or is that a thing that happens all over?
Well, it depends on what you're trying to do and what kind of have, and really what community you have or live in. But I think for a lot of people, because this stuff takes time and isn't always easy, it's definitely more worthwhile if you have if you develop personal affinity, you know, and enjoy the time you spend with people. I think the sort of level of social relationships among the BMFP members is a bit unique in how long-standing, how deep, how sort of interpersonal it really is. It really goes beyond the work. You seem to really enjoy each other as people. But anyway, I guess I'll say there's some element of that in other places as well, but it's not always there. It really depends. But yeah, I mean, it's a major motivator. Do you go to a meeting with a bunch of people you don't like, or build relationships with and enjoy spending time with?
I'd jump in on that too and just say, you know, when collaborative partnership efforts started in Wallowa County underneath the Natural Resource Advisory Committee here back in 2000, 2001, you know, for that first 10 years where we were very focused on Wallowa County, it's almost exactly the same to what you're experiencing with Blue Mountain Forest Partners. And we began to lose that then when the Wallowa Whitman Forest Collaborative formed, and now we were meeting in LeGrand, and we were pulling in people from a much larger area and had much longer distances to drive to meet. And then, you know, I think, again, scaling up to the Northern Blues, that has a challenge for the type of longer term commitment and relationship building and socializing that has been important. And I think that's where the notion under my Blue Mountain Woodlands of trying to create these stewardship networks, these nodes at a lower level, more local level, where you can really build those relationships, but hopefully there's some alignment with that larger landscape structure and goals comes into play. The relationships are key. I mean, no matter what whether we're working on public or private land, the relationships, the conversation, just the familiarity with each other is really important. And yeah.
I just want to add quickly to what Nils said, that a lot of successful examples of collaboration that held up in the media or in academic literature really were fairly place-based. Relied on a lot of people who were local to the place, were able to spend a lot of time in that place. They were kind of a little more community scaled. So a big question that we are all looking at is, yeah, how do you have that, some of those qualities of really strong connection to place in each other when you're working across really large and diverse landscapes where different communities are involved?
Yeah, I have kind of a follow-up question to keep this thread going. You know, this past year and a half with COVID has really driven this rise in using Zoom and these other online conference media for these types of meetings. And on the one hand, it's really opened up the opportunity to engage in these types of collaborative sessions. I know I've on occasion been able to attend, and it didn't require driving 3-4 hours to a certain site, to Baker City or to Wallowa to make that happen. But also what you lose is that in-person connection with people. And I just wonder if you see collaboratives moving forward, really embracing these online platforms, or trying to move back towards that in-person meeting so that those, you know, one-on-one connections can get made.
I suspect we're going to see a hybrid. And I think one of the things that I've observed during COVID is that we've been able to hold out during this because of the great relationships that we have. It's been super hard to build relationships. A few, you know, I can't say none. And we've done, you know, a lot of the work of the Northern Blues All Lands Partnership since COVID started, and there's been a lot of relationships built there, but boy, is it a lot harder than it is doing it in real life. That said, there are huge advantages to doing things over Zoom. You can get people that wouldn't normally be able to make it. There's been a huge advantage in terms of inviting fabulous researchers from other states who would it would normally be very hard to get to actually show up on such a regular basis. And so that's been an enormous advantage. I suspect we're going to move to some kind of a hybrid, and not sure what that's going to look like yet, but I guess.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I think the hybrid is going to be key, so that you both have the opportunity to form relationships, and we think maybe about rotating where meetings are to facilitate more people meeting, but that you keep the online opportunity so that you're not excluding people from participating if they can't make it there in person.
Great, thank you.
Andrew, I've got a question if I might.
Please.
I've been trying to send it to you, but your system tells me you're not here. I don't know where you are, but you're not here according to Zoom. So for each of you, I'm just thinking about the context of big C and small C collaboratives and SAF. So SAF is composed to a bunch of us who are primarily professional foresters, but we have a lot of walks in life. So for me, in my university forester role, participating in collaborative activities is kind of part of what we do. But that's not necessarily true for my other SAF colleagues. So some of us are going to be in agency positions where we're focused more on the management of that agency's forestry needs, and others are going to be consulting foresters where they're going to make a living by engaging with private landowners or industrial landowners and things of that nature. So I'm wondering what your best sales pitch is, each of you, for encouraging foresters broadly to be engaged in either big C or small C collaboratives, and you can pick which one you think is most appropriate. And I would be curious to hear from each of you, what your sales pitch is for encouraging greater engagement from professional foresters in collaborative type work.
I'll jump off there, then I'll let some folks. And I don't want to steal Nils' thunder, but I think that a key component, especially in rural Eastern Oregon, is our commitment and recognition to have a rural community-based success. And that means that consulting foresters and all foresters everybody needs to be successful. I think that's one of the key things is you have to recognize that everybody that participates has a different metrics of success. I have a different metrics of success as an agency than you do, John, as a professor, but also that's different than a consulting forester has as a metric of success. And I think we have to recognize and embrace and be willing to ensure that everybody can be successful according to their own metric.
I think that,
Nils, you want to go, Pam?
Everybody has almost the same set point about how long is too long for the silence. Well, I would start by saying that to some extent, everybody already is involved in the small C collaborative. We all have to work with people because none of these projects are small enough that we can do alone. And I guess my sales pitch on that one would just be to acknowledge that it's real and that the relationship building is a part of it, and that your work is going to work better if you see the people that you're working with in that small C collaborative sort of way as the rich diversity of humans that they really are, and you ask them, you get to know them on a level that's just a tad deeper, at least, than the formal, so here's what you want to get done. Because, like I said, I think in the presentation, we move at the speed of trust. And as you deepen that relationship from just sort of a formal arm's length relationship into one where you know people, what ends up happening is you just get to know, like, where can I trust this person to just like have my back? And anytime you're working in a complex environment, that kind of stability is just super helpful. You know that if I'm going to be out for whatever reason, that it's going to move forward correctly, and I'm going to be there for them when that time comes as well. And that just changes the nature of the experience of it. Okay, so that's small C collaboratives. It's just like admit that you're already there and like actually invest in that. Big C collaboratives, what I'd say is it's not actually necessary that everyone join in those. Some people, your job is not really going to be appropriate for being involved. Some people, your job clearly is going to be appropriate for being involved. And then there's going to be a bunch of folks in the middle. And what I would encourage to do is to go and sit down at whatever it is that seems like the right place for you to get involved. And what I offer as the most likely value for you coming out of that is to be exposed to perspectives on your work that you hadn't considered before. And for some people that can feel really like, why would I want to be exposed to those? I already know how to do my work. But we do this work in a social context, and to understand the many different ways that this can be seen will give you a depth of ability to present your work to different people and to allow the work to be appreciated and cared for in the larger community. Now, there's always going to be some people who are going to be naysayers on, for whatever reason, but people care really deeply. I mean, all of us went into this forest work because we care really deeply about trees for whatever reason. And coming to the larger C collaborative, the formal collaborative, will allow you to really see and work with and have some level of empathy for a lot of those different perspectives. And that will only make you a more professional forester in the long run. And you never know, it might turn out to be fun too.
I'd just say quickly, I think there's because everybody's, not everybody has it within their job description or their ability within whatever the expectations or performance metrics and financial plan people have to participate, that it's really important that the members who are participating are working, basically trying to informally outside of the formal collaborative to build those relationships, make sure that people are being kept informed of what's happening, and also bringing back to the table the knowledge, the wisdom, the experience, the results from other people that help inform that table, just like any kind of representative table. The second thing is, collaboratives, formal collaboratives, go through their own evolutionary patterns. And just because it may not be productive to engage at a certain point in time doesn't mean that it would never be productive to engage. And you may see that as they begin to be focused on a particular project area or particular set of issues within a zone of agreement, that would actually be a really constructive time to engage for a defined period of time to help that project or that zone of agreement emerge, but that you're not making a permanent commitment to do that. And so just another thought on that.
I'll just quickly second what everyone said. I'll add that as professional foresters, you have technical expertise that you might offer. Even if you're not a member or going to all the meetings, going key meeting, like a field trip, just be really interesting. You can see the ways that different people are talking about enforcement. You can see some of the current these get driven by different concepts at different times, or different priorities on the administration. So what are like the words we're using to talk about forestry these days? Ideally, these all-in partnerships may produce work for you. I mean, they may generate the need for the need of a ready cohort of private landowners that need your assistance. Pam might.
Yeah, and I had one more idea, one more perspective that hasn't been covered yet, and that is just nationally right now, for whatever reason, we seem to be in a time in history in which there's a lot of misunderstanding and even polarization going on. And these collaborative efforts are really pulling in the opposite direction. They're really trying to create situations in which people who would normally not talk to each other, not sit down at a table, not get to know each other, actually do that, and do that in a context in which we really make a very concerted and intentional effort at understanding shared facts and understanding and appreciating and respecting differing sets of values and how people could have come to those. And I think that's important right now. I think that's important for our democracy. And if you think so too, you should come to the collaborative.
Well, and I'd just say quickly that, one of the things we recognize within all these partnerships and collaboratives of all shapes and sizes is that people are now sort of very differentiated in what sources of information they trust and find credible. And that's where trying to bring together groups that can share a similar sort of message and information, but to their own audience, to their own groups that trust them as a source, helps us to break some of these divides and helps us to unify within a community or a region and work together. And that ability to pull people, pull resources, pull ideas, pull sort of motivation back together is critical at any time, but particularly in our communities that have suffered this really significant transformation in systems, in social ecological systems that we did through the 90s. And getting reorganized and aligned is critical. And today, they're not going to accept it just from OSU Extension or just from the PNW lab. Different people are going to trust different sources. And that's a key role I think we play.
Well, thank you so much. What a wonderful discussion this has turned into. I certainly share, or in my own experience, working as a forester for a tribal organization and being involved in collaboratives, I think all of these benefits of being involved in a collaboration that were brought up, I have personally experienced, but also there's a lot of challenges in serving as an intermediary between the work in the collaborative and my agency. And so I still find it very valuable, as Pam really brought up. And I'm also really excited about these meeting points being a place where we can kind of heal some of that partisan nature of our country right now. So really, really great discussion. I want to thank all of our speakers during the session, Pam, EJ, Jay, and Nils. Really wonderful presentations, really wonderful panel discussion. We're now rounding out into our lunch hour, but before we all break for lunch, I'd like to bring up our slide for the raffle giveaway. So John, if you could bring that up.
You see it, Andrew?
I can see it. So we will be raffling off another SAF bag and 10 combo. And drum roll, please. The winner of this session's raffle giveaway is Sky Greenler. So Sky, you have won the raffle, and John and Jacob will be in touch with you following the session this afternoon to arrange for you to receive that. So we'll now take a break for 1 hour. And during that time, it's mentioned in the chat box, but I encourage everybody to check out the silent auction and see if there's anything within there that you would like to make a bid on. All the revenue generated from that goes to good causes. And we'll see you back here at 1 o'clock.